we need to start talking about, and I'm sure many of you already have, but this can be a very effective strategy, is to talk about normalizing the experience that especially youth are having right now. And they will say to me many times in my practice, I don't feel normal. I don't feel like my normal self. Parents are concerned because they're not seeing their quote unquote normal child. It just doesn't look or feel normal. Um, and it's a tough time to be hard on ourselves and expect ourselves to be acting normally because it isn't normal. So, what is actually normal is that when we're in times of great uncertainty, like it says on here, it's normal to feel exhausted sometimes with no warning, to feel ups and downs, to feel depleted when you felt great yesterday, or feel periods of burnout and then feel like you're in recovery and not really knowing how to anticipate them. So the more that we can normalize that versus destabilize someone by saying, oh, you got to get it together all the time, we're actually going to move them more towards self-compassion. So being patient with themselves, accepting the situation for what it is, and then being able to move forward. So a really harsh, get it together, military approach, really solution-oriented approach during a pandemic is not always effective for a lot of youth. And so that means a lot of athletes and a lot of coaches and a lot of leaders. So normalizing it can actually help take the pressure down, right? Diffuse it a little bit. And we need to start having those conversations with our teams, with our communities, with our schools that reinforce this. We also want to be careful though, because there are some folks that are really struggling beyond what we would say would be a typical level of fluctuation. They're really having trouble functioning. So this would be things like having trouble getting out of bed at all, basic self-care needs like showering and hygiene, eating, appetite is gone, no sleep, things like that is where you might want to reach out to get extra support. But if it's sort of subclinical levels where it is that normal ups and downs and dips, that's actually more normal than we would have expected, or that we want to be talking about. So having that discussion, because this is a different kind of scenario. So using these solution oriented, like really set goals and very finite, defined high expectations in these times that aren't flexible can really haven't been that effective for some young folks in particular. So, and that's because this is a different type of loss that they're experiencing. It's called ambiguous loss. And that means it's the type of loss where there isn't really a solution. It's different when you have a loss and you will go through a natural grief cycle and an end will come. And this one doesn't have a solution imminently. So when you're in ambiguous loss, motivation is going to dip and ebb and flow, and having solution-oriented coping skills might not work. This is why we might want to shift the way we look at it and instead adjust the expectations. So instead of raising and creating a ton of structure in every possible place, we might want to just inject smaller forms of structure, but with some flexibility, and adjust expectations instead. Because you're going to find that some of our athletes and coaches, things that were really important to them a year ago might not seem as important now. Or things that would have soothed them before and have been really fun or calming or all that might not be as effective right now. So making sure we keep that language of this is for now, but not forever. Using that language like for now, this is normal for now, and having flexibility on expectations. This might be something that you might want to shift in your program and see if it can reduce some of the pressure cooker and this sense of frustration and not feeling normal that your athletes might be feeling right now. If we want to think about building resilient teams, we also can look to other sectors and how they're doing. So healthcare, for example, had to learn early on that they can't do it on their own. One solitary nurse one doctor, one respirology specialist, one social worker, one healer is not going to be able to do it all. So we have to do it as teams. So changing the language about building really resilient teams that can weather this storm, move away from saying things like, we can handle it as leaders. Instead, sharing with our teams that sometimes I have trouble handling it all. I ask for help when I need it. So being the type of leader that we can tell the truth, right? And let them know some of the fluctuations that we might be feeling too. We know that resilient people and resilient teams, a lot of the healthcare teams, especially that are managing the best, are working through their issues together as teams versus on islands or in solitude. And so I hope that the sports sector will continue to reach out and have such great ideas like these webinars and phone calls and check-ins with your team to make sure that we're doing this together and not letting folks get too isolated for too long. So doing the check-ins. If you've been on my calls before, you also will be familiar with this wise mind approach just by a show of hands. So who here has been on the calls in the past and some of the webinars and remembers being exposed to this model before? Does anyone? Just put it in the chat if it looks familiar. It might be that I have a lot of newer folks and it doesn't look as familiar. Maybe this is fairly new. So I guess it would have been back in one of the early, would have been maybe June I spoke. Okay, so some folks it's new, they're new. So it makes sense. They're like, what is this model? So this way of thinking with athletes, it's getting them to recognize. So this is when they're in competition, but it could be also when they're in practice or now when a lot of them aren't competing. When their mind is in a different state. So sometimes we're really highly emotional minded, where we are feeling really strongly. And so think about the athlete that might have anger management issues in your sport. Okay, so they live a lot in their anger, and they take a lot of actions, and they make a lot of decisions when they're in that emotional mind. And maybe they have trouble in the penalty box, right? They have trouble with the officials. They have trouble with some of the impulse management. So they likely spend a lot of time in their emotional mind. Reasonable minds, those are when we're in more of an analytical or really rational state. So we're kind of in almost like student mode. We're thinking things through. We're piecing all the pieces together, and we are more separated from our emotions in order to tackle that situation. And we make whatever action or decision we make it in that more reasonable mind, kind of a practical mind too. The wise mind is the one in between. And we get wise mind in many ways. We get it from simply getting older, having more experience, but we also get more into our wise mind in the middle by having someone who is a mentor, like a coach, a parent, an elder, a community leader, who is able to show us and make us more self-aware. Oh, I'm really in my emotional mind right now. It's probably not a good time to send that email, right? Or, oh, I'm really in my reasonable mind and I just want to solve this solution, but that person is crying over there and looks really upset. I think I better not talk and just listen and be more alive to the fact that there are a lot of emotions going on, just not with me, and making a wise mind decision. So it helps create a little bit of space between the emotion and the reasoning. And this model is a way for athletes to approach their athlete development, but also just their development as a person and as a leader. So when I'm working with athletes, and now these days we're trying to find direct solutions to things, but because of the pandemic, some of the old solutions just don't work because we have a lot of constraints on us right now. So instead, getting them to think of the wise mind decision in between. Well, what would be the middle path? Okay, well, I can't do that, or I won't do this. What would be the middle path? There could be a third decision. to a lot of this, we could call it black and white thinking, or in the psychology field, we call it dialectics, or thinking really dichotomously in good, bad, right? So there is actually maybe a middle path, a balanced way, a wiser way to be interpreting this. And so how do we convey this? How do we teach this to our athletes, but also as leaders? How do we teach this to ourselves? So getting them to have middle path thinking in a pandemic can be really useful, because it's almost like it's flexible thinking. It's not being as rigid. It's being a little more kind to yourself, and it will help them also to be patient with others too. So middle path thinking. It's exploring options if they're lacking in motivation, for example, and it's just like, I'm not going to get out of bed at all today. I don't want to get out of bed, and therefore I'm lazy. You know, they might start labeling themselves, and really going between extremes, like they're all in or they're all out. Well, there might be a middle path where they can be in between these opposites. And so they might be in emotional mind one day, and then the next day more rational, back and forth. Or this could frankly happen in a 30-minute period. Like, you just never know how your athletes are going to be reacting, kind of going up and down. Day started out well, now it's not that great. So this middle path thinking is helping them to be aware of that and know that, for example, if it comes to doing things that you need to do and doing things that you actually want to do, you can possibly do a bit of both. So I'm going to do some of the things that I really want to do, but I'm also going to make sure that I get some of those things that I need to do, even though I don't want to do them. I can be here in the middle. I can find a way into the middle instead of flip-flopping all over from extreme to extreme. And so every athlete, when I'm working with them, I challenge them, instead of thinking really good, bad, black, white thinking, it's like, is there a third option? So just asking that question, is there a third option, when they feel like it's hopeless, or nope, there's only this way. There's probably a wise mind decision in there somewhere. Once the emotions settle and once they can use that analytical mind at its best, there's something in the middle. They can still work on improving themselves. They can also accept they are who they are, right? It's possible to do both. You don't have to just do one and discard the other, or go the other way, do only one and then discard the other. You can be in the middle and do both. So this is the third option, or the middle path thinking. And middle path coaching is a really great way to take for kids, especially who have given up on themselves and are really hard on themselves, and leaders that are really hard on themselves. Middle path is a great way to build self-compassion. So if the motivation is lagging, and that really militaristic or punitive sport is well known for using things like exercise to punish, unfortunately, and have a lot of really painful and dysfunctional ways of disciplining or almost bribing athletes to be motivated, when in fact, what they probably need is to be more self-compassionate in order to find the resources to get to the next step. So it's really changing your way of thinking as a leader, and for the athletes that are listening, your way of being, really, and behaving and motivating. Another example here, so teaching them that they can work on learning to rely on themselves, being independent without their coach always having to check in on them all the time, and relying on my coach's prompts all the time to motivate me. But I also can learn to ask for help. So it isn't about me being completely self-reliant. I can learn how to rely on myself, and I can continue to ask for help when I need it. It doesn't have to be an either or. So somewhere in that middle is that middle path guide to enhancing motivation. And it will take a bit of a shift. You'll find yourself catching yourself when you kind of really want to push one way or the other, and you still can. It's just important that I think we introduce this concept of the middle path to younger people, and really make sure that they understand it. And we want to make sure in past webinars that I've given, we want to make sure that we give them the language to check in. So if they are lacking motivation, and like that's the only info you get from them is, did you do your workouts? How's that going with that Zoom workout? Didn't see you this week. Well, I'm not motivated, or I just didn't feel like it. Okay, well, where are you at with stuff, and making sure that we're checking in on the personal, on the school, and on the sport, and giving them the language to dig a little deeper into it. So one image that's a universal symbol, I think, that most of them can relate to is just this stoplight or the traffic light. And this concept of, if they're in the red, the yellow, or the green zone, the red being really frustrated and stalled and maybe needing some help. Yellow being I'm in caution challenge zone. I'm kind of pushed. I'm getting short-tempered. I'm really fluctuating here and I'm heading towards the red, but I'm stable. And then green is where I'm kind of, I'm good for now. I'm pretty much, green means go. And so this is an example of an intake with one athlete doing a quick check-in. I call them my parking lot check-ins when we're walking out of the building and everybody's standing 6 feet apart, and coaches might stand there and athletes will come in and just have their 5 minutes. Traffic light, how you doing? Yellow, coach. Yellow today. Okay, it's all good. And it's a really quick way to check in. It can also be a way that you do it by email or just doing a roundtable with the team, encouraging your team also to check in with each other. So having the athletes do the same thing if they're feeling fluctuations, knowing they're not the only ones that are maybe in yellow zone or red zone. And then maybe you can group them together. So if there are more than one that are in red zone or yellow zone, and there are a few in green, let's figure out what's been working for them, and maybe we can buddy up and help, again, do it as a team. We have to know when we have to model when it's time to ask for help, and we have to model that we have some systems in place with middle path thinking, that it doesn't have to be all in or all out. We can find a way to keep you in the middle and do that as a collective. Other athletes like to have, or some coaches have built, you can use tools if you want, or you can have your athletes come up with them on their own, but having their own flexible daily plans for your athletes that are really the planners. So their personality is very, in psychology, we look at the different personality types, and there's conscientiousness are the folks that like order. They like order and they like lists and they like writing things down. They might like something like this. Others, it isn't so much this, they'd rather just have something on their phone, or maybe there's a calendar or a picture on the wall that they can look at to remind them that they have certain things that they need to do that day. It needs to suit the athlete, but the basic components of the plan to help keep them moving forward and enhancing motivation would be trying to touch on, for starters, up on the top, you'll see there's 6 buckets there, and they might not be the same for every athlete. Those buckets might look different. And oh yeah, good idea, Elisa. I can make sure that we get that chart out so that they can, good idea, be able to just plan for that. Be able to plan for that and build that on their own and personalize it. So the different things that they're going to do today to touch on those areas, because if they're really feeling like they're struggling today and I just don't know what to do, pick 1 or 2 of these areas and figure out something you're going to do for yourself in the one that most appeals to you. There might be some that you're just not going to be able to get to today, but pick 1 or 2 or however many numbers, however many are a priority for them. and find a middle path solution. They might have certain strategies that they want to tackle. And it doesn't have to be for the day. Maybe they have certain strategies for the week. This is the week where I'm going to be all about music today. I'm going to wake up to music. I'm going to use music when I'm feeling low. I'm going to maybe write a song or some lyrics. Who knows? But all my athletes are really different. It has to suit their personalities. What they do like is that having their own plan that they get to be more in charge of. It's that sense of autonomy that I talked about earlier. How they needed the autonomy was the first of the 3 components. And autonomy is, and relatedness too, knowing that the rest of their team or knowing that their friends might be doing this as well, and they can share different strategies. So maybe for one, the strategy has to do with another interest that they have, or another one, the strategy is they're going to get their workout done early in the morning because they find they're too tired at night. So they're going to front load things in the morning when their energy is highest. That's their strategy, is, morning energy. I'm going to use it, and so on. So coming up with just 3 strategies, doesn't have to be tons, but just something that they can feel a little bit more in control of. And then these other 2 in the gray zone here, this is helping athletes recognize, and you can remember all these things can be for you too. So for the coaches and the leaders too, this is for you as well. If there are particular things that they know are their go-tos that are helpful, whether it's for coping, motivation, feeling connected, whatever that looks like, just reminding themselves when they're in their rational mind, write them down. Because when they're in emotional mind, they forget, right? It just disappears like the wind. And it's like, oh yeah, it's true when I do that. And I usually feel better, but you don't remember that when you're in a really highly emotional and often irrational state. So making sure that we have that down there. The helpful things, is talking to my grandma, right? Is reaching out to my best friend, is taking my dog for a walk, is making a cup of tea. Having these things that are written down when they're in their rational mind, and the things that they know are harmful and to avoid. So if they start to gravitate towards that, they know they have that on the list of, this takes me to a not a good place, right? These are the things I want to avoid. I don't want to, maybe it's reach out to someone with whom they have a big conflict, and it's really not going to be a productive thing for them to keep connecting with that person. They've identified that, and somehow, they get sucked back into that, even though they've really tried to move on from something. So it could be something like working with my young adult athletes. It might have been formerly a very negative relationship, for example. So having the harmful pieces there as reminders too, when they're in more of their rational mind. And then this is an important one from both a safety perspective and a mental health perspective too, having the go-to person. So who is that particular person? There might be more than one, that is really the person that I can count on, and that I want to make sure I let into my circle if I'm struggling, or I'm having trouble motivating myself to do X, Y, Z. This person is kind of my go-to. So having it somewhere, having the phone number handy, and these days they live with their phones on them anyway, so the chances are they probably have that handy. But in case they don't, making sure that you've got that as well. So this is a sample of what that plan might look like. And it's borrowed in part from what we use at the Canadian Centre for Mental Health in Sport. It's called CCMHS. And this is a form of some of the plans that we use, and with a program called Game Plan. Again, going back to think about the concept of the middle path, they can focus on themselves, but they can also focus on helping others. This has been something that keeps coming back time and time again. A lot of coaches, a lot of athletes telling me, this is a time of great sorrow and challenge for a lot of folks. Some people are very ill. People are losing loved ones. It's a really tough time, and they feel selfish almost. They feel like what they're feeling isn't valid. And, me investing all this time and energy when so many people are suffering isn't fair. But again, with middle path, you can focus on yourself, right? That's a good thing, to take care of yourself. We want to encourage that in our athletes. And we also know that there are little ways that they can also help others, and getting creative on what that helping might be like. So maybe it's helping prepare the vegetables for dinner. Maybe it's tidying up something around the house without someone having to ask you, walking the dog, or doing whatever that is, reaching out to that one teammate who lives in a remote community and is feeling pretty isolated, and being that go-to person on the team who always checks in. There's almost always enough little energy to give to someone else, and what they discover is when they give, it actually comes back to them. So having them again see the middle path. It isn't about us completely disconnecting and focusing only on ourselves, or giving so much to ourselves that we burn out and we forget about our own self-care. That's not good either. There's a middle path, and we're all capable of middle path. We talk about it and brainstorm it, and sit down and really reflect and think about, what would that third option be? So maybe it doesn't have to be all this or all that. Maybe there is a middle path way to approach this. The things I would say over the last 11 months, these are the 7 categories that I would say. I guess there's 8. I kind of embedded with self-compassion and meditation, kind of mindfulness down on the bottom. You could say these were the 7, 8-ish that seemed to be the most effective, and used at different, in different ways. But the places that we want to really be focusing our energy, if we can, if we've got the energy to spare, these would be the places to invest it. So some of them will come as total no-brainers. Obviously, rest and recovery. So even though sleep can be very challenging right now for a lot of athletes and coaches and all of us, it's a great place to invest some understanding and hopefully finding some relief and improvement in focusing in on getting enough sleep. That goes along with nutrition, exercise, so moving, however much or as little, gentle or intense, high intensity. It's going to depend on the person. Being connected as much as they can with others, cultural or spiritual practices I could have put in here as well. And learning to say no, that's another one. I personally need to work on that one quite a bit because it's really hard for folks that are in helping professions or have a personality of wanting to help. It's sometimes the very hardest thing of all is knowing when your own batteries are running low. And I find a lot of coaches and teachers and community leaders fit that same profile. So a lot of you that are on this webinar tonight are probably experiencing this. It's okay to set some boundaries. Our motivation is going to be fluctuating for the months ahead. So there might be times where we simply need to say no, or say no, like not yet. Okay. At some point I might be able to, but not right now. And that's okay. And then that brings me to the last one. So just teaching self-compassion to our athletes, that it's okay to be gentle with themselves. It's okay to fall short on some of the goals that you're setting right now. It's okay to be kinder to yourself. In fact, now would be a really good time to be kind to yourself. And it's a good idea to take a few minutes every day to just sit with that knowledge and just close your eyes and just be and give yourself a break. There's one exercise that some of the athletes that I work with who are particularly hard on themselves, some of them have suffered trauma in the past. Some of them are particularly sensitive and really struggle with performance anxiety, is they just take their hand and put it over their chest or over their heart. And they just take that second to tell themselves that they are going to be kinder to themselves today. I got to be more of a friend to myself today, because I've been really, really tough on myself. This week has been tough, and I need to be the best friend that I am to other people. I need to be that to myself. And what we see after months of this and coaching this and trying to pull this out in these athletes, is that they're starting to come around to it. And it's helping with that surge capacity. For folks that are burning out, the ones who have learned the self-compassion, they're kind of like, ooh, today's the day where I'm not going to have super high expectations, because I'm starting to get to my max and I know that. And I'm going to be okay with that for once. And I know that this too will end, and that I will bounce back. But for today, I will be kind, and I will have a different type of expectation. And it surely helps to have a coach who is also aligned with that way of thinking. So it doesn't really work if the athlete is willing to do that and the coach isn't. So this is why our leaders in sport need to be educated on this too, and be encouraging and building these type of mindsets or team cultures in these tough times. So every day is a brand new day to decide where you're going to focus. So whether it's using this chart, or whether it's having a flexible plan that they have available if ever they need to start really getting in there, either side of their wise mind, you've at least given them some tools that they can use in order to move forward, instead of feeling completely overwhelmed, like there's no hope. And I'm just going to, what we're worried about is the dropout from programs, right? And sport, we want to avoid that. We want to give them some tools that are flexible and that they can use. Other athletes have really been, it's interesting because they have started some very unique passions over the pandemic. Does anyone recognize these photos? Does anyone remember when these were happening? I don't know if we've got any snowboard coaches on the line or any snowboard athletes. Does this look at all familiar? Is it totally new to everybody? It might not ring any bells. You needed to have been paying close attention to snowboard. No? Okay. So yeah, some people are like, nope, I have no idea what this is. So this coach was a snowboarding coach, as you've probably figured out by now, since I've mentioned it multiple times. And he was spotted at the top of the snowboarding event. That's his athlete standing right next to him, about to compete. Okay. And, he's doing what every coach does at the Olympics, of course. He's knitting, right? So, that's what all of you, I'm sure, do. I'm pretty sure if I were to ask you, this is not a task that most of you do when you're under extreme stress. And in this particular case, for this particular coach, this was very effective for him to be able to manage his anxiety, do something with his hands, and get himself honestly into that wise mind state where he's not attending to things that are completely distracting, and just self-regulating and not being a distraction to his own athlete. So knitting is a great example. So knitting, beadwork, all kinds of artistic pursuits have been things that a lot of athletes have been doing over the pandemic. I think this is a great thing. So there you can see him again. I have another shot. This was a screen capture from the TV. Where he's knitting. And what was interesting is, so during the stress of something like the Olympic Games, what ended up happening is it started to spread over the entire Finnish Olympic team for the Winter Olympics. And by the second time around, after Sochi in Pyeongchang, a lot of the other sports, so the Nordic ski team and the figure skating team and hockey team, they all brought their knitting needles too. and recognize the power of just sitting quietly and making something, right? Doing something artistic, doing a hobby that previously wouldn't have necessarily connected with athletic performance. But what it got them in was it got them in a calm, relaxed, wise mind state. So worth a shot. I don't know if we have any knitters on the on the call today, but I'm not saying that you need to go and buy knitting needles for your teams, but maybe it's worth a thought. So it's one example of different hobbies and activities that athletes and coaches and programs have been doing that hasn't been sport related necessarily. The other place we might want to focus is maintaining relationships. And we talked a little bit about that too. The relationships are going to look little bit different, maybe, because we're not going to have the same connection, the same immediacy, but connecting with others and finding ways to be okay while we're apart too. So it's okay to be both those things. And you need to know what are the actual needs. So if you have a family member, a teammate, a friend, whoever who's struggling, asking them, what do they need from us? Do they actually need a solution? Or do they just need to feel comfort and feel validated? Or do they just need someone to listen to them and just to talk? So when we do those check-ins with the stoplight exercise, what are the needs? What are they actually looking for? These are some of the questions you might want to ask. We can have the physical distance, but we don't need to feel emotional distance from our athletes as well. And we've mentioned this on some of our other webinars too. So that's the long way to come around to the very beginning where I talked about motivational profile. We can't actually change an athlete's motivational profile, but we could change the climate. We could make it a middle path environment and give them tools to find a middle path, to be kinder to themselves, to adjust their expectations, to create some personalized, unique plans that might work for them, might help them get off the couch some days, but some days make them okay with staying on that couch and being kind to themselves, knowing that tomorrow is a brand new day and they have a plan. But they might not do it this exact moment, right? And that might be okay. So that's the motivation, some of the motivation backstory, which takes us to another element to motivation, because you need motivation in order to build habits. And now we're going to talk about if you've got habits and you want to change them. So we're going to end tonight using a model that I hope you will take with you. And maybe I can send this same model out as well, Elisa, so we can email this to folks that have been on the call tonight too. What are habits? How are they formed? So this is what I want you to be able to take away from tonight is this habit change model. So these 4 words are really the core of it. And your brain runs through them every time you form a new habit or you're succumbing to a habit that you have in a behavior. Cue, craving, response, and reward. So what are those? What do they actually mean? So the first one, the cue, it's the thing that triggers your brain to first initiate that behavior. And that it's very animalistic. It's very back into prehistoric ancestors, searching for food, searching for shelter, safety, all those basic needs. It's the hint, it's the smell of baking. It's the smell of coffee. It's the feeling of a cigarette between your fingers, right? It's the sight of something that is the promise of a future reward. So it's the cue. The craving is the force behind it. So it's not actually the habit of drinking the coffee. It's the fact that the coffee is going to it's going to change our state. It's going to make me feel awake and happy. Okay, that was specifically for me, this particular picture, because I really love coffee. My cue is to smell it, walk by a coffee shop, even just seeing a logo of a favorite brand of coffee for me is my cue, which clicks into the craving, which I remember as soon as I have my cup, I'm going to feel good and I'm going to feel awake. And that response is the actual buying of the coffee, drinking of the coffee, because I know I'm going to get from the response the reward. It's the end goal. The reward is the drinking of it, and I relieve that craving. And I have learned that I love coffee. So we chase those rewards because they relieve the cravings that the cue indicated, and that the action gives us, and the reward at the end. So those 4 cycles, we go through them time and time and time again all day. They basically are, this cycle is an endless loop that we're doing all day long. It's just some of these cycles are high functioning and serve us well, and some of them we consider to be counterproductive. And we put them into overdrive, and we actually want to break them because they're really not serving us well anymore. So we need to think about why that might be and what that might look like. So then let's think about that. So if that's the cycle, what are some things that interrupt that cycle? Well, first of all, a lot of times if I don't even have the cue, like I'm going to use my coffee example again, if I don't smell it, I don't necessarily feel the fatigue. I don't have an ad that's coming up, but the habit just won't start. If we don't have the cue, then the habit just won't start. If we reduce the craving, then we're probably not going to have enough motivation to even act on it. So there's some ways too that we can get rid of, that we can lower those cravings, and that also is going to make it the reduction of the action. The behavior might be too hard. I might have to, oh, well, if I want a coffee, I need to like grind the beans. I got to go to the store to buy the beans. I got to then bring them home, put them in my coffee maker. If I consider that to be too difficult, I won't do it. And if I drink it and I don't even like it, it's not even tasty, I'm not going to repeat it. So there's some folks that have not developed coffee habits because something in that loop doesn't work for them. So they don't have issues with it, right? And so if you don't have those 3 steps, the behavior isn't going to occur. If that 4th one, especially doesn't anchor it, behavior isn't going to be repeated, and that means you're not going to have the habit. So what I get asked all the time is, how can I enhance or create better habits, on my team, or give this, give sort of a step-by-step of how I can figure out what habits my athletes want to break or make and break, and what does that look like? So you need to have the good habit chain. So with the cue, what you want to do is make a really obvious cue. So let's say it is you want your athletes Monday morning, you've decided for whatever reason, we'll just do this as a random example. It's the team Zoom workout, right? And it's the only time that will work, or it's been decided by the team that's the time to do it. What are we going to need to do to make that a habit? So the cue has to be super obvious. So it's really loud alarm that they go off, and then they see their workout gear literally in their face, like right beside them in the bed, for example. Even their shoes might be on their pillow next to them, something like that. I'm making up silly examples here, but you get the picture. I just want to be able to drive home the picture of it. So you have to make it really obvious. Yes. Okay. The workout. The craving, you have to make it attractive. Everybody, guess what? You get to have, brand new workout shirts that we're going to, now I'm really layering it on thick. This might not be sustainable because you can't be buying them new shirts every week. However, I'm just trying to give an example of what that craving might look like. So making it attractive. And the response, making it as easy as possible so that it's really not cumbersome with them. They have the technology, is easy for them to log into. It is right there. They know that the demands aren't so huge. It isn't a really long workout. It's just short enough and just long enough for them to feel like they can succeed at it. And it's got to be fun and satisfying. Everybody's doing it together. And the end goal has to be well established and they need to want to do it. So maybe asking them questions about what that could look like and what would make it the most satisfying, what would make it easier, what would make it more attractive, and what would make it obvious. This will help you come up with a team solution to a challenging issue like doing that early morning Zoom workout. So that's just one example of the good habit chain. And then if we want to break a bad habit, so lots of my athletes have been telling me they've been eating, how would we say, low nutritive value food, as have a lot of people, frankly. As an example, instead of the energizing fuel that they need in order to complete their workouts. That would be one example that's often. So more comfort foods and not necessarily high nutrition value. So to invert that habit chain, the cue would be make it invisible. So simple one, if it's salt and vinegar chips like me, don't buy them. So don't have them in the house. That's number one. So make it invisible. Okay. Make it so that it's really not easy to see and to cue. The craving, meaning make it unattractive. So it's not as enticing. So whatever that is, if there's a way to shield it, if there's a way to camouflage it, if there's a way to replace it with something that's even more attractive than that, then do that. The response, make it difficult. So if you've got to now go in your car and drive all the way, or you got to get on the bus, you got to go, and it's difficult, too difficult. And for the reward, this is the hard part, because sometimes the reward is very satisfying. So you might have had to have some kind of alternative or deterrent thought process about, but if I have this, I know I'm going to have an upset stomach. Ooh, and I remember that. And I remember what that felt like. Or it could even have a picture of a really negative experience when they were in that state or doing that activity, and they can go back there by looking at that picture and going, yeah, I remember that. I don't want that. Yeah. So it can conjure it. You can do some, it's a little bit more imaginative. So you're going to have to get creative maybe on making it unsatisfying, but that's what that loop looks like. So has anyone seen this model before or tried to follow this habit model in the past? I'm not sure if anyone has, no one mentioned that this looked familiar. So I guess this might be hopefully some new tools to try. So just remembering the cue, craving, response, and reward. And we'll make sure to send this information out to give it a shot. Yeah, Atomic Habits uses a number of different models. And I think this is likely the one that it's based on. So just applying this, but in your sports setting. So whether it's to do with training, nutritional decisions, sleep habits, ways to connect, the types of influences that are around your athletes, just asking those questions. Whatever it is, posing this to your athletes. How can I make it more obvious? How can I make it more attractive? How can I make it easier? And how can I make it satisfying? And this will help with things like motivational climate building, retention, adherence. So exercise adherence to plans that you set out for them. So this is a model that we use a lot in performance psychology and building motivational climates. So the last step, I guess, is just before we say goodbye is reminder then of middle path thinking, adjusting expectations, flex plans that you might want to supply your athletes with, and whether or not there might be some habits that they want to tackle. And so, as Elisa has mentioned earlier in the chat box, I will get her some of the materials and the breakdown of the slides that represent some of the more important crux of the information for tonight, and she can send that out to you as well if you weren't able to jot it down as we went along. And that wraps it up, I think. I really took it to the wire there, though. I didn't leave a lot. I was hoping questions would pop up along the way, but I don't know if anyone has some now. And also an alternative is that you can fire questions off to me at any time, whether going through iSpark or directly. Just Google me, and you'll find my website or a way to get a hold of me as well. I'd love to be able to support you if there are particular issues that you're struggling with, or the folks that you're coaching, programs that you're dealing with right now. I'd love to be able to give you some more personalized solutions. Might not have felt comfortable saying them online here in front of everybody. So yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Shaunna. It was a really great presentation. Do we get a certificate for participating this seminar? Currently, iSpark does not have a certificate in place for this. Michelle, is that correct? No. If not, I feel like we could send you like some fancy like thanks for participating with us, and hopefully it was good.
You know what? You know what though? You could maybe apply to get these as Pro D points with NCCP.
Oh, Michelle is shaking her head. So maybe Michelle, that's something Michelle and I will look into. And if it is something that we can consider those for points, then perhaps we can email that to you guys. NCC points would be great. Yeah, totally. Michelle is one of our top coaches at iSpark. She's the go-to girl. So I feel like she's all knowledgeable in that. So after this webinar, Michelle and I will reconnect about that and how that we can make that happen for you guys. Definitely. Awesome. So as Shaunna said, if you guys have any questions that you weren't comfortable here, please feel free to email me or Shaunna. And thank you so much for attending the session. And we look forward to having you guys in future sessions. Thank you, Masai.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Michelle and Elisa.
That was awesome. So good.
Erin, have a good night. I always do this. I run out of time. I get bogged down in like one thought, and then I realize, I only have 15 minutes. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. The comments look good.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was awesome. I'd love to get well and share it with as many people as I could point in that direction once it's on YouTube. But yeah, it was really good. Super like it. I don't know. I think a lot of people will get caught in the like, I'm going this direction, and if I'm not, then I'm way too far that way, and they forget about the option to be a little more flexible and forgiving of themselves. And I think that would be super helpful to remember as a coach. So hopefully, a lot of coaches saw themselves reflected in changing their thought process a little bit, because I was like, oh my